Welcome back, Endgame community. I'm Pierre. He's Chris. We're here to talk about some wide receivers today we think might be a little overrated in terms of draft value. Now, disclaimer, let me make sure I repeat that. We're not talking about guys' talent. We're talking about their ADP and where we think they're being valued in terms of fantasy football drafts. All right, let me make that clear. These are all great receivers. We just might not be drafting them because they're going too high. So let's start it off, Chris. Give me a player that you think is being drafted a little too high at wide receiver.
Speaking of talent, and don't get up and walk off the set there, but I think Jalen Waddle is being drafted too high. I really do. And this is a guy I like. I liked him last year. I loved him at the start of the offseason. I was kind of comparing him to Deontay Johnson, as in that guy that you could get in PPR leagues who was locked into a ton of targets, a ton of receptions, maybe didn't have a huge ceiling, but every week you could count on them. You didn't have to worry about him. And then they traded their entire future for Tyreek Hill. And now I've got to back off him a little bit because I think this offense can support two top 15 wide receivers, and that's where Jalen Waddle is being drafted. He's being drafted as a top 15 wide receiver. I don't think it's going to be able to support Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle as top 15 wide receivers. And they're paying Tyreek Hill QB money. He's going to be the number one. He's going to be the focal point of the offense. Jalen Waddle will get a decent number of targets and a decent number of catches, but he's never going to be a huge touchdown guy, and he's never going to be a huge yardage guy. So he's a guy who needs a ton of targets and a ton of receptions. A good number of targets and a good number of receptions just won't do it. I still think he'll be solid in fantasy. I think he'll probably be like a low-end wide receiver 2 in PPR leagues, but not a top 15 wide receiver. Again, like you said, don't get mad at me. I love the talent. I love the player. Just think his ADP is a little high considering his situation.
I'm just going to do the smart thing, just recuse myself from this discussion here. Say, look, if you don't want Waddle and the leagues we're in together, I'll take him. That's all I'll say. All right, now you mentioned Deontay Johnson, so guess who I think is being overvalued? And it's Deontay Johnson. Now that sounds a little crazy because look at last year. He was second in the league, tied for second in targets, fourth in team target share, and he was top 15 even in red zone target share. So let me tell you why. And again, Deontay Johnson, great player, a guy who, being drafted late as he was, not expected to be the top target on his team, has really made a great career so far. But things are different in Pittsburgh, and namely Ben Roethlisberger's gone, which you think on the surface is a good thing, which it is for the offense in general, assuming, of course, Kenny Pickett is able to, handle the pressures of the pros with those hands. Or Mitch Trubisky. Who knows? We'll see who's the quarterback. And look, they're probably going to be fine. And I'm not saying that either one is going to be a step down from Ben Roethlisberger, but here's the difference. Every quarterback has the guy that they know and trust, right? There's a chemistry thing, and we know that's real. Deontay Johnson was basically Ben Roethlisberger's safety blanket. He had to go to Deontay a lot more often, and he went to Claypool a little bit less last year because he just couldn't get the ball out for Claypool to reach down the field, right? Those big plays, those shots down the field, they weren't happening. Ben Roethlisberger had one of the worst deep throw percent accuracy rates in the entire NFL. Deontay is open a lot. He gets him underneath, a ton of targets. I just don't think it's going to play out that way because Kenny Pickett, he's probably going to spread the ball around a little bit more. And this team, honestly, is probably going to focus on their best weapon, which is Najee Harris, the running back. So as much as I like Deontay Johnson, I think he's a good receiver, I just think he's going to take a step back because he's not going to be peppered with as many targets. They added George Pickens, another receiver in the mix here, adds to their depth. Freiermuth, who we both like, is going to take another step forward in his second year. I just think Deontay isn't a guy who's going to be a top 10 receiver because of all those reasons. He's just not going to be as, volume. He's not going to get as much volume, let's just put it that way, which means less fantasy production. All right, let's move on. Another overvalued fantasy receiver.
Yeah, this is another young receiver that I really like, and that's Gabriel Davis of the Bills. Liked him as a rookie, liked him last year, like him this year, but not where he's being drafted, not as a top 24 fantasy wide receiver. To me, that's drafting him at his absolute ceiling. It's not like the Bills have done nothing at wide receiver this year, and it's just going to be him and Stephon Diggs catching all the passes. They brought back McKenzie. They signed Jamison Crowder. Like they have other weapons there, right? We got Dawson Knox in town still. They drafted James Cook, who, if nothing else, can at least catch passes out of the backfield. This isn't just going to be Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen like back in the day on the Vikings. Gabriel Davis is not going to command a high enough target share to pay off a top 24 season without major touchdown and yardage upside. And look, it can happen, but again, you're drafting him at his ceiling price here. And especially when you look at guys that are going right after him. Rashad Bateman, who we talked about on the undervalued receiver video. Brandon Cooks, who we also talked about on the undervalued receiver video. Darnell Mooney, who I really like this year, who's the #1 wide receiver on his offense. Others as well. These guys are all being drafted after Gabriel Davis. I get it. It's the Bills. Everybody just wants a piece of the Bills, right? If the guy's on the Bills, his stock is automatically way higher than it should be. But that doesn't mean you should draft these guys at their absolute ceiling. That's where I feel like Gabriel Davis is being drafted right now. So again, love the player. I think he'll be great this year. But paying a top 24 wide receiver price for the guy, just way too high in my book.
Yeah, how do you explain Gabe Davis's ADP this early? 2 words: recency bias. So how do you explain Chris Godwin being drafted so high when the last thing we saw from him was being carted off the field with an ACL injury? So missed the very end of last season, but realistically he might not be ready for week 1, and if he does, he's going to be playing all season coming off of ACL surgery. We know that's not a good thing. History has proven while guys can be on the field, they aren't as effective. You will lose some efficiency that way. I think we're basically drafting Godwin as if nothing happened. He's only seeing a small drop in his ADP. I mean, he should be, hypothetically, top 15 receiver. If everything was fine. He's being drafted as a wide receiver 18, coming off of ACL surgery. That's very optimistic for me. Look, love the guy. I had him a ton last year, but I'm not taking him as a every week starting receiver based on what I expect of him coming back. I'd rather take Mike Evans, who's going barely, a few spots before him, or I'll just wait and take a different guy who I'll talk about in a different video on Tampa Bay's receiving core later. All right, let's keep it going. Give me one more wide receiver you think is being drafted a little too high.
All right, bring on the flames, bring on the hate. I know it's coming because everybody loves Amon-Ra St. Brown because he won you your fantasy championship last year, right? He went off in the fantasy playoffs, and literally, if you had Amon-Ra St. Brown, assuming the rest of your roster was halfway decent, you probably won your fantasy championship. Now everybody thinks he's the guy in Detroit, and that's just going to continue, and he's awesome. But I'm here to tell you he's not. He's an okay wide receiver. He's not bad with the ball in his hands. He's not a great route runner. He's not a guy who's going to get tons of separation. He's not a guy who's going to get open all over the field. And, oh, by the way, who was on the field for Detroit when Amon-Ra St. Brown was going off last year? Pretty much nobody. Not TJ Hawkinson, barely DeAndre Swift. They had no other wide receivers. He was the only guy they had to throw to. DeAndre Swift is healthy. TJ Hawkinson is healthy. They added DJ Chark. Whatever you think of DJ Chark, he's better than any wide receiver that was on the field during that stretch when Amon-Ra St. Brown went off last year. Don't fall for Amon-Ra St. Brown. That was a 3-game or 4-game stretch where he just happened to go off, scored a ton of touchdowns. It's not going to continue. It's not sustainable. This is still going to be a bad passing offense. He's not an elite upper tier wide receiver. He just isn't. Please don't buy into the hype. Let somebody else overdraft this guy. You can get somebody better at that spot. Don't fall for it. 2021 was 2021. This is 2022. It's not going to be the same. Don't draft him.
That's one thing we definitely preach. Don't pay for last year's stats. I absolutely agree. It's not going to happen again. We all want to root for him because, let's face it, he has the best first name that you could possibly think of, but the sun god is just not going to repeat last year. Not going to happen. All right, and then I'll end with a guy that I have said I am going to have zero part of this season, maybe ever again. I don't know. We'll see what happens in 2022, but I really don't care where Michael Thomas is being drafted or how far he falls. I am not going to put him on my fantasy team. Speaking of paying for the past, obviously last year was a wash because of injuries, but let's think back to when he was the best receiver, right? He had that great season. He had Drew Brees, a Hall of Famer, as his quarterback. And the other thing is he had that monster target share, those huge totals, both receiving, yards, everything. Who else was on that team? Let's think back. What was his competition for targets on that 2019 Saints team? The next leading receiver, just on the squad was Jared Cook at the tight end position, who had half as many yards as Michael Thomas did. The next leading receiver in terms of wide receivers was Ted Ginn Jr. with 421 yards. After that was Traquan Smith. It was all Thomas. That was it. That's all he did. Drew Brees was pass to Michael Thomas. You're not going to see that again because this Saints team has a first-round receiver they just drafted. They also added Jarvis Landry. You remember, he's a pretty good receiver too. It's not going to be the Michael Thomas show. And oh, by the way, that's assuming that their quarterback, who's supposed to be Jameis Winston, is even healthy, ready for week 1, which right now he's not even 100% healthy. So to draft Michael Thomas at wide receiver 20, which means you're counting on him as your wide receiver 2 in fantasy, to me is borderline insanity. But even if you talk about him as a top 36 receiver, I don't want any part of it. Honestly, I'm just avoiding him altogether. So it doesn't really matter how far his ADP falls. He will be overrated to me because he's not even healthy. Okay, so Michael Thomas will be overrated, and I'll probably say this a few more times before the season starts. All right, guys, so that's what we think about these receivers. We also have some underrated receivers that we want to talk about. Check out that video, and some sleepers. Oh yeah, we do this for running backs too. We do this all off season long to try to help you prepare to dominate your fantasy league. Check us out. Join us on Discord. Information in the description below. All right, thanks for watching.